Hi there, Peter Fayroian here, head of Greenhills School, and of the many things that I enjoy about being Greenhills head is I get to have conversations with so many of our alums, both informally and formally. We have set up recently these formal conversations, though it's not that formal, with alums in this kind of setting where I will ask them questions about the amazing things that they're doing in the world, and we make this available to you. So today I'm here with Amos Giora, who is an Israeli-American professor of law at S.J. Quinney College of Law University at the University of Utah. He specializes in institutional complicity, enabling culture, and sexual assault. He served for 19 years in the Israeli Defense Forces and achieved the rank of lieutenant colonel, and is also widely recognized as an expert in counterterrorism and national security. He studied history at Quinney College, earned his J.D. in law at Case Western Reserve University School of Law, and is a PhD in Faculty of Law at Leiden University. But most importantly, he's a Greenhills alumnus of the class of 1975. Welcome, Amos, back to Greenhills. And I will say, when I say back, Amos is a devoted alum, very interested in what we're doing here, as we are in what he does. He comes back often, and it's really nice to see you, even in my short time back in this stint of mine. I've seen you at least a couple times. Thank you for working with our students. And an opening question is, what keeps you coming back to this place?
Greenhills, in a word, formed me. I think that's the essence of it. I came here in 9th grade in 1972. I'd wanted to come in 7th grade, but at the time, for reasons that are unclear, I was interested in science. And at the time, there weren't the kind of labs that I thought would make me into a scientist, and so I went to Tappan Junior High for 2 years. And as soon as I could get out of there, I came here, and it was clearly the list of long decisions I've made. There's no doubt that the decision to come here was absolutely critical to my development. And you mentioned that I've come back often. And I had the wonderful opportunity in one of the talks I gave here. In the back row, there was Bill Reich, I think maybe Harlan, and maybe Tim Pasek. And I took the opportunity to say to the student body, but more importantly to the three of them, and Marty was there, to say thank you. Because I think it's important for students to understand that without teachers, you really can't advance. It was a wonderful opportunity for me to thank them, to acknowledge their contribution to my development. On the way here, I called my 89-year-old mom who lives in Jerusalem. I said, guess where I'm going? She said, well, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Greenhills. She was like on the verge of tears, because it is also both my parents. My father's deceased, and I'm an only child. For them, Greenhills was just a right fit, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
That's great. Now, the teachers that you mentioned, right? They were long-serving faculty members here.
Sure.
Who really were founding teachers in many ways.
I still live in fear of Harlan Underhill's red pen, and I'm 64 years old. I mean, good Lord.
That's funny. Right, well, we do. There's that lovely, poem, Gratitude to Old Teachers. I don't know whether you've read it.
No, I've not, but
I'll send it to you, about the teachers, the metaphor of them being underneath the frozen lake, holding us up as we go through life. It's quite lovely.
I think also, if you were to bring back others from my era, especially because I graduated in 75, there was a sense of a little bit dramatic of being present at the creation.
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting to think back as I look around. Obviously, you've changed. There are new things here. What strikes me is the core is the core. Ed Reed, your predecessor, didn't have nice chairs like this. But you look around, and the drive used to say, now you got much nicer parking spots.
For better and worse.
That's
yes.
right. I mean, I'm incredibly fortunate that, as I say, Greenhills formed me, and I'm still able to have this relationship. And I would be remiss if I were not to say that, Teresa Casey for me, right, is the one who's kept me, in the loop here. I'm beyond grateful.
Great. Yeah, Teresa Casey, who is our Director of Alumni Relations and class of 82.
Yeah,
Sorry, Teresa.
She's really young.
Yeah, she is. 90, I meant, not 70. And she'll be leaving us in our that post, right. as you know, and she's been fabulous in engaging us with our alums. And so I'm curious, you were here at our founding, and we talked a little bit about things that you've seen here, but you're one of the alums that have been coming back over the years. So both specific to Greenhills and what you've seen and experienced, but also you are an academic and you're in the world of academia. Your thoughts on what you've seen both here at Greenhills and the way we've evolved, and what you see out in the greater world in terms of the evolution of secondary education.
So I go from the light to the heavy.
Okay.
The dress code.
Is that the light or the heavy?
That depends on... No, I had to work that in there. I think the mere fact that you're holding a book that I wrote and you're willing to have a conversation with me about sexual assaults is frankly in a topic that has been around since forever. But I'm not sure that whether here at Greenhills or other schools 20 or 30 years ago, you, someone in your position, would have been willing to have this conversation. And I think that's absolutely to your credit. It's a gradual, glacier-like shift, and whether it's in junior high schools and high schools that are, I'd like to think, increasingly willing to have these, frankly, awful conversations about awful topics. I spend not all of my day, but a significant part of every day meeting Zoom with sexual assault survivors. A fair number of them who were, the wrong word, but we can't really find the word. They had affairs, which is not the right word, with teachers. Everybody knew, and nobody did anything. And that's why I think, again, not because I wrote the book, but it's absolutely essential to have these conversations. Many don't want to have them. From the perspective of survivors, we're crying out loud to have the conversations. I do a lot of speaking right now worldwide on this topic, and I think it's essential to have this conversation. But I do want to emphasize, as I now know from my research, when I was here, I don't know what happened. Such things happen here. There's no way at all this conversation could have occurred 30 years ago, or when I was here 50 years ago, when I was here. There's no way.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your saying that, and I think that I will just say personally, like you, I'm engaged in my field with colleagues in my field, and I can say safely after so many years doing this that any head of school that says that these things haven't happened in any of their schools or wouldn't happen, is naive, lying, or both, and I think,
or sheer stupidity.
Yeah, right. And I think that we should always acknowledge this, because we are in the helping profession, and as in other helping professions, there's only it's a one-way relationship, right? And so I really admire that, particularly with your work with bystanders and the ways in which entire institutions and communities, whether it is an entire country or an institution, enables not just this behavior, but also doesn't help survivors in the ways that they need to be helped. So can I before we get to that, I do want to talk a little bit about that. I have to say, you've had an admirable shift in career focus, and when you left here, you went to Kenyon College, and then you served as an officer in the Israeli army, and then you became a well-respected and international authority in matters of national security, international law, counterterrorism. This isn't your typical Greenhills graduate trajectory. So I'm curious, did anything, I'm curious about that trajectory and whether or not something triggered you here to move in that direction. Tell us a little bit about that path to that point, and then we'll talk about your work.
Sure. So I graduated from here in 75, went to Kenyon, graduated in 79. I went to work in Washington for 3 years. And then I went to law school. I went to law school at Case Western Reserve. I went to law school for one reason, that was to enter politics. Check it. All politicians are lawyers. And then when I graduated from law school, I made the decision, rather than moving back to Ann Arbor, which had been my plan, that's when I made the decision to move to Israel, where I served the idea for 20 years. And today I commute between Salt Lake City and Jerusalem.
Are you the only one on the plane doing that?
The commuting lifestyle?
No, commuting from Salt Lake City to Israel.
No, I mean, their flights are filled. Don't forget that in Salt Lake City, there's the LDS community. They have a campus in Jerusalem. BYU has a campus in Jerusalem.
Okay.
It's an interesting question. So I did serve for 20 years in the IDF. I did operational counterterrorism, and then when I came to academia, most of my writing was indeed on operational counterterrorism, national security. It never, ever, ever, ever occurred to me to fall into this bystander enabler world, and it happened utterly and totally 100% by chance, as unintended can be. Both of my parents are Holocaust survivors, but they come from the school of thought that says the following, that we will never share any of our experiences with our children. So I'm an only child. When they got married, they made the deal that they'll never talk about it. Not with their children, me in this case, or with each other. And so I grew up in a home where I knew there were Holocaust survivors. I grew up knowing zero underlying about my parents. And that's the way they wanted it, and so I respected that. I was training for the Salt Lake Marathon 8 or 9 years ago, and my running partner, who's not Jewish, we're one of those awful 20-mile runs, said to me, like, how did this
as opposed to the really pleasant.
Exactly. And well, some are pleasant and some are really awful. This was awful. And I mean, and she said, how did this being the Holocaust, how did this happen? And I had a really brilliant academic answer, which was, I have no idea. And I was 55, 56, I'm 64 now. I went back home, this was in Salt Lake City, and I said, enough is enough. And I started reading, and the more you read, but I want to emphasize, beyond embarrassing how little I knew. And the more I read, I realized there was a topic that had never really been addressed, and that's the role of the bystander in the Holocaust. So I said to my running partner, I said, hey, this has never been talked about. And she went online and she found a scholar named Victoria Barnett, who was one of the two people who's written about the bystander in the Holocaust. I said, oh my God, Victoria Barnett, right? And she said, well, call her. I said, no, I can't call Victoria Barnett. I mean, she's like Victoria Barnett. I'm just Amos Guiora. She said, call her. I said, no, I can't call Victoria Barnett. So she found her phone number, and I called Victoria Barnett. I have no doubt I sound like a total idiot. Hi, my name's Amos Giora. I'm a bystander. And she was beyond gracious, and she said, if you come, she's at the Holocaust Museum in D.C. She said, if you come on a jet plane, come to D.C. for 3 days, I'll give you 3 days. But come prepared. So I came super prepared. I did my homework. And that's how this book was born. And the book came out, I think, 5 years ago. It's been translated into Dutch and Chinese. And I've given talks here, there, and everywhere. I've taught in the book.
And this is not, you're not talking about Armies of Enablers.
We'll get there. It's Crimes of Complicity, which is the bystander in the Holocaust. And I researched my parents. I got zero cooperation from my parents. I discovered their Holocaust story. And that for me made it all worthwhile, as awful as it is. And then I thought I was done with this whole bystander thing. And I was having dinner in Chicago with my publisher, which is the American Bar Association. And I don't drink, so he plowed me with a piece of cake about this big. And he said, what's next? I said, Brian, I'm done. Can't do this anymore. He said, yeah, but you're a big sports fan. You've heard about Michigan State. And you heard about the Catholic Church. I said, I have. He said, well, there's your next book. Yeah. And like an idiot, we shook hands. I went back to my hotel and I said, dude, what is wrong with you? Because I had no idea what I just agreed to. And then, you start putting the pieces together and you start interviewing people. And I spent 15 months interviewing the survivors at Michigan State, USA Gymnastics, Ohio State, and the Catholic Church. I could not get...
Penn State?
No, I couldn't get to the boys at Penn State.
Oh, okay.
There's a wall around them.
Right.
Couldn't get to them. So the book you're holding, The Armies of Enablers, it came out exactly a year ago, and I thought I was done. And my life has 100%, I don't want to be dramatic. I don't know if change is the word. This has become my life. Mm-hmm. I've done webinars worldwide. I think I've spoken to people in over 30 countries. Survivors reach out to me. Most days I wake up to emails from survivors who've heard me speak or read the book. But I want to emphasize, it's not the attack that interests me. The perpetrator doesn't interest me. What in polite academia, what fascinates me, in impolite English, the obsession, is the enabler. The person who knew and made the conscious decision not to act on behalf of the survivor. The whole question of institutional complicity, enabling culture. Today, I lecture on this stuff here, there, and everywhere. I'm an expert witness, whether in legislatures around the world or in court cases, not only in the U.S. And that has led to a new book project.
I was going to ask about that.
Yep, called Piercing the Veil. As we sit here in Ann Arbor, I'm co-writing it with John Vaughn, who played for the University of Michigan late 80s, early 90s. Then plays in the NFL. Vaughn is one of the 900 plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the University of Michigan. Most of the plaintiffs are John Doe. He's John Vaughn. And we are, if you will, doing an expose on what enabled the sexual assaults by Dr. Robert Anderson of thousands of former Michigan student athletes, particularly also students, but primarily student athletes.
Right. Yeah, so that's a little different for you, right? So we all, this much of our awareness and education began with Catholic Church and Spotlight in the Catholic Church, and then certainly Penn State, when USA Gymnastics,
right.
And then you had Penn State and Michigan State and Ohio State, and for people in Ann Arbor, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan State, those things happen over there. What's it like for you as a Michigan person?
Listen,
fan?
Not only am I a fan, I don't know if you know this.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't go to Michigan, I have season tickets. I fly in from Salt Lake for every game.
Right.
I can kick anybody's ass playing Michigan football trivia. They're all mine. I grew up in Michigan football. I live and die Michigan football. And it is, frankly, conflicting. I am conflicted and is therefore conflicting. Now that we're uncovering what we're uncovering, am I going to the game tomorrow? Yes. Is it the same joy it always was? It's complicated. And I've made the cut, if you will. The kids who play for Michigan today don't bear any responsibility. Mm-hmm. Do I have criticism of President of the University of Michigan administration? Don't get me started. Mm-hmm. But I'm able to do this.
Right.
But it's not simple.
Right. So how has this experience, this conflicting experience, which really, that experience is at the heart of much of your work, right? So how has that informed you as you look back at your work before, now that you are able to perhaps internalize some of this?
That's an interesting question. So, I love Ann Arbor, and I didn't go to Michigan, but I breathe amazing beer. I think the word is sobering. You know what the expression "never meet your hero"? Mm-hmm. It's sobering to reflect back on people who I don't idolize people, but who I had the greatest respect for, and to realize that there were other sides to them. That what you thought you saw wasn't the whole picture. And because some of the people that were writing about I knew, and or friends of my parents. I remember saying to my mom when John and I started this project, for her also, Ann Arbor is Ann Arbor, Michigan is Michigan. But I think the best piece of advice I got on this project was from my mom, who said, truth needs to be written, and leave no stone unturned in the search for the truth, wherever it may land and whoever you may irritate.
Right.
On the other hand, John Vaughn was raped 40 times. And the only way that John Vaughn could be raped 40 times is because there were a whole host of people who enabled Bob Anderson to be treating the Michigan football players. Yep. It never should have happened.
What is your experience? And that it's tragic, and your work in helping him and others will help us all. And there is, can you comment a little bit about something that I've experienced in my world as the head of an independent school that's 52 years old, but I've also been affiliated with schools that are 175 years old. And there's a tension right now of leaders of institutions who were present, perhaps not in the current context of understanding these things. One would say absolutely enabled behavior, but there's this argument, and I don't buy it, but there is that argument out there that times were different back then. And can you talk a little bit about, your thinking surrounding institutional responsibility as bystanders or enablers in the context of less understanding, less appreciation for what was happening?
Right. As soon as you said that the times were different, first thing that ran through my mind was, even if the analogy is uncomfortable, we're both adults. 50 years ago in the United States of America, there were two water fountains. Mm-hmm. There was one for the white guy and one for the African American.
Right.
And I use that analogy in class all the time. I remind my law students there were two water fountains in America. It took them a while to catch on to what I was talking about, mm-hmm. but that's the reality, and that's the way it was, right? Mm-hmm. Jim Crow. That answer is too easy, mm-hmm. and I agree with you. It's used widely. Thomas Jefferson, who was an extraordinary American, there's bad sides to Thomas Jefferson, and I think if we're really going to be honest in asking these difficult questions, we're going to have to move beyond that's the way it was. The quote unquote the good old days, right? The nostalgia, and peel off an innumerable number of layers of the onion to really understand, to get to the truth. And the truth is obviously a complicated word, but I genuinely believe that whether in the context of enablers, sexual assaults the way it was, listen, I've interviewed and spent how many hours with Catholic Church survivors. And there it's generational. The abusive priest probably was himself abused, right? And he was abused, it goes back. But it's too easy to say that's the way it was. I think institutions hide behind the facade of the building, right? Behind tradition, behind all the accoutrements, if you will, of tradition. We're going to have to, if we want to be honest, it's painful, have to ask ourselves difficult questions. I've written a lot about issues that I was involved in the IDF, and Israel Defense Forces, in terms of operational counterterrorism decisions, from the light to the very heavy. And if you're honest, reflecting back is important. Is it always fun? No. But I think it gives you an adds to your depth of understanding. Even though, trust me, some issues that I was involved in aren't always fun to reflect back on. But I think it's important. It's valid, albeit difficult.
Right. I'm sure you've thought of this, but when your book does come out and is more widely read, received, appraised, criticized, have you thought about what it will be like for you to be at a University of Michigan football game then?
I told Vaughn that when this thing comes out, it's safe to assume that we won't be on people's bar mitzvah invitation list.
Or maybe not in the same suite that
right.
you were invited to last time.
But you know, the previous book, The Crimes of Complicity, the Bystander, and the Holocaust, when that book came out, I get criticism is fine. You write a book, you get criticized. What I did not expect were death threats, which were visceral, specific, clear, involved obviously law enforcement for all the obvious reasons. You know, you write books like this. Do you irritate people? Sure. But I want to emphasize something. You know, really brave ones here are the survivors who have come out. You know, we're sitting here on this lovely Friday, 2 days ago, testified in the U.S. Congress for 3 gymnasts. They're speaking for hundreds upon hundreds of survivors who testified in the Lansing courtroom a few years ago. They're also speaking on behalf of those who don't come out. They're the really brave ones, and I think that we also need to be honest here. Social media can be vicious, and the social media with respect to particularly the women athletes has, in some cases, has just been shockingly vile. There's also social media with respect to Vaughn and some of the football players. But with respect to the women, the girls, the women, I don't think they were prepared for how much anger is the right word, would be directed at them. But they're the ones who need to be applauded. I mean, I don't like these phrases, but they humble me, they honor me by reaching out, and if I can explain the enabler to the broader audience through them, then that seems that whatever price I pay is absolutely minimal compared to what they pay.
Right. That's well said, Amos, and it's such an honor to sit here and have as our school's mission statement end with to make the world a better place. I mean, you're doing that. It's really you are in your work. You are making the world a better place, a safer place, and I work with young people. We all do. That's why you come back, is you have such hope for young people in our world. Practical advice. I mean, what would you, for the young people in our school now, what are some, I know that you talk to our kids, but for the people looking at this right now on their computer screens, their phones, what's some practical advice, and what are some thoughts that you would have for young people right now, so that these things will happen less often, hopefully never again?
So because I served in the idea for everything's divided into 3s, I'll give you 3 answers.
Okay.
One, in no particular order, right? One, don't duck behind the iPhone. Engage directly with people. We all do this. The eye-to-eye contact, I think, is absolutely essential. 2, be honest with what you see and have a sense of responsibility to the other. I genuinely believe that. And 3, because my late father was a psycholinguist, be language proficient and culturally aware. And don't think that your swim lane is the only swim. It's easy to fall into a myopic approach. I think think really don't duck behind the phone. Be aware and be engaged. Disengagement is a terrible thing. Apathy is a terrible thing. History shows it leads to really bad things. And you know, I see what the Greenhills did for me. So I was obviously it formed me, but I was also incredibly fortunate that I grew up in a house of books. And I was told to read, so I read. And Harlan Underhill used to make us write down. Remember this? What book did you read, and how many points do you assign to that book? And there was competition every year between Kate Draper and myself, because we were the two main readers of my class. And Kate always kicked my ass every year, but I wanted to be Kate Draper because I really believe that that books, reading, and you asked me what hobbies do I have. I think my hobbies are sports, politics, and reading. And if you look at my 12th grade yearbook, somewhere you guys have my yearbook somewhere, I think it says there my interests were sports, politics, and reading.
There you go.
There you go. Not a damn thing has changed.
Well, Kate Draper, if you're out there, I think the challenge is on.
Game on.
We're gonna have a little quiz bowl with you and Amos. Well, I can't think of a better way or a more fitting way to end this than with that advice. Not just as a linguist myself and an English teacher, but also as the head of a school that is empowered to help young people be the best versions of themselves, and I think a school that has their social emotional development all the time. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Being here, for coming back as always, for all the work that you're doing, and we'll see you next season.
Absolutely.
I hope.
Can I take one of these chairs with me?
Can you take one of these chairs? Sure. They're a new addition to Greenhills.
That's great.
Yes, we'll arrange that. I don't know if it'll fit in the luggage compartment area on your way back to. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Good.
Thank you for having me.
To see you again.
Thank you.
Good, and we'll see you all in our next installment.